I want to thank everybody for coming. My name is Doug Reese. I'm president of the Lagoon Pond Association. It's really nice to see everybody in person this year, mask included, and I appreciate everybody putting a mask on for the indoor event. Just so you know, we are recording this whole program so that we can put it up on our website for anybody that wants to review what was said today, or anybody that didn't make it to the meeting, they can see what we talked about. Your presence here today is very much appreciated by the board, because that tells me that you guys are environmentally conscious and you're concerned about what's going on in Lagoon Pond and the watershed. And remember, the purpose of the Lagoon Pond Association is to protect, preserve, and enhance the character of Lagoon Pond and all the immediate areas. Our interests include water quality, the natural beauty, resources such as fishing, shellfishing, recreation, and safety. So we try to cover all those items in what we do as a board in making decisions. We do need your support in following everything that we do. We like your input, and we appreciate if anybody has a desire to join the board, that you either put a mark on the membership form or call one of the board members and let us know. We could use a couple more board members at this point. We're down to 11, and we can have as many as 15, but we do have a couple of needs, specifically somebody that can help with the membership committee, somebody that can help with our computer and our website needs. So at this time, I'd like to ask all board members to stand up so we can recognize you. We have only a small turnout today. This is Sherry Countryman. So that was Sherry Countryman over here, Barbara Copans back here, Emma Green Beach, Danielle Ewart, Chuck Fisher, and then those that are not attending today because they had other commitments, Lonnie Goldthorpe, Dan Martino, Rich Weiss, and Nancy Cole, who is our treasurer. A lady named Bev Postid, who is with Tisbury Waterways, is our liaison. So at each of our meetings that we have a time slot for Bev to tell us what the Tisbury Waterways people are doing. Sherry's also on the board of the Friends of St. John Kentucket, so she acts as a liaison there. So all the boards sort of know what's going on with each other, which is really great. So we have 3-year terms, and this year we have 3 members that are up for re-election. That's Danielle Ewart, Dave Hearn, and Lonnie Goldthorpe. They've all agreed to serve for another 3-year term. So do I have anybody else that would like to jump in and join the board at this point? If not, can I have a vote of aye for re-electing these 3 people? Aye. Any nays? So done. Thank you very much. Okay, now we have the treasurer's report. Everybody should have a copy of that on their table there. Bottom line is, looking at the balance sheet, and I'm always a bottom line person, we've got a little over $20,000 in the account. Last year, we spent more than we brought in. That's because with COVID, we didn't have a lot of events going on. We also gave back to the Permanent Endowment Fund a $4,000 grant they gave us for our summer intern program. But because we didn't do the program last year, we gave the money back so they could help with the island needs of food and clothing for people that were affected by the COVID. So it was a good thing to do. So we're doing a big membership push right now. Please talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors. They don't have to live in the watershed. They just have to be concerned about the environment around Lagoon Pond. It's a $40 membership fee. And so anyway, just please bring some new members along. Anybody have any questions on the treasurer's report? So I'm going to make, could I hear a motion to accept the treasurer's report as provided? So moved. Second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. I talk fast, so if I talk too fast, let me know. So our year-end review, what we are doing, how we're spending your money. Go through this real quickly. We have 2 summer interns, one in Oak Bluffs and one in Tizbery, that are working hand in hand with the shellfish constable. And part of their job is to patrol the waters and look for people that are not operating within the boating regulations. If you did not get a copy of the boating regulations for Lagoon Pond, we have them out on the table here. And so Mike Stens, Mike, are you here? Mike's in the back here. He's working on, is it Saturday and Sundays? Yep. So you'll see Mike on the pond Saturdays and Sundays. He's boating around. He's helping people if they need any questions answered on, again, boating regulations or shellfishing. He's also out there helping with the removal of spider crabs and green crabs, if I'm not correct. Is that right? Yep. So if you see him out there, stop and say hello to him. And then in Vineyard Haven, we have Casey Pupek. Is that how I say it, Casey? Hi, this is Casey, and Casey's working with Danielle on the Tizbery side. So real quick, the reason we have it separated, part of this intern was to have somebody patrolling the pond. But because the pond is separated by 2 towns, we need to have 2 separate people working for one town and the other town to be able to be on the water talking to people, because if it's an Oak Bluffs employee, they can't talk to people that are breaking the rules in Tizbery. We're going to work with the select people about that and see if we can figure that out, because I know on the Vineyard nobody wants to get along, but really, this only makes sense. So we've only recently installed some signs at 10 different water access points, and we have QR codes. I don't know if you've seen them. They're about that big, and the QR code, it basically says boating regulations for Lagoon Pond, so that as people are entering the water with either a sailcraft, a motorcraft, just going out fishing, they can click on that, and that'll take them to our website page that has the boating regulations, so they can see them right there. And we've run into problems in the past with, Larry. With people not paying attention to the rules, boating too fast, too close to moored boats, or people swimming. And so we figured it's our job to educate the public about these boating regulations. We're going to work with both of the harbor masters to see if we can get an insert into next year's mooring bills that go out, so that everybody that has a mooring in the pond will get a copy of those boating regulations in the mail. So number 3, eelgrass propagation. Those of you that are shellfishing people, there's very little eelgrass, if any, left in the pond. So Emma and her group over at MV Shellfish are working on a eelgrass propagation program where they're taking eelgrass from, is it Edgartown Great Pond?
All over the island.
All over the island, and they're bringing it here and trying to get colonies started. So we gave them $2,000 toward that program. We gave $2,500 to the Martha's Vineyard Commission, and they purchased a dissolved oxygen meter so they can monitor different parts of the pond and where the oxygen levels are.
It's actually up near the
It's what?
It's near the head. There's an orange buoy. It says research on it.
Oh, okay.
That's where
That's where it is now? Okay. Thanks, Danielle. So in the fall, we were hoping to get this done in the spring. We just didn't get to it. In the fall, we're going to install a kiosk down at the boat landing. That's about, 2 feet by 3 feet. That'll be right where you walk onto the dock, and that'll have the boating regulations, the QR code, phone numbers for questions people might have, so that, again, we just want to educate people about the rules of the pond. And then we're trying to work with the town of Tizbery to put a portable potty there at the boat landing. Hundreds of people a day launch their boats there. No place to relieve themselves. So it's either going in the water or they're going in the weeds next to the parking lot. And it's not a pretty scene sometimes. So we Danielle proposed to the Board of Selectmen that the town put one there. They said they weren't going to do it, but if we wanted to do it, we could do it as long as we built an enclosure around it so that one of the select board members didn't have to look at it when he drove down the road. So we're still working on that. We haven't got that one figured out yet. Updates on projects. Sorry, I got a little foggy there. The Lagoon Ridge subdivision, you all may remember, was in the works for the last 10, 12 years. A gentleman from the Cape has a company called Cape Built Homes, purchased the property from the Danielson family and is busily putting in the infrastructure for, Jule, where are you? How many homes? Jule?
There's representatives from Cape Built to...
Oh, okay. Oh, hi, guys. How many homes are going in there?
It'll be a total of 25 homes over all the phases.
And how many of those are affordable?
So originally it was 3 under the original special permit.
Yeah.
We increased that to 4.
Okay. And then there's some senior housing going in too?
Yes, there are a total of 6. One is cross-designated as both 55 plus and affordable. That was a cross-designation we put in, and then there's an additional 5 designated for 55 plus.
Great. Thank you very much for that update. No, it's on Barnes Road. It's off of Barnes Road where Double Ox goes back in off of Barnes Road. So,
You haven't just talk about the septic system and
yes, yep. So our concern when this all got started was the nitrogen from 25 homes going into the watershed that close to the pond. And so we attended the planning board meetings and the Board of Health meetings, and we talked about the need for using what's called enhanced treatment. And through research on Davio's part and his engineer, they came up with a system called an amphidrome system, which is an on-site sewer treatment plant. And so all these houses, I believe, are the ones on the 1.5 acres, are they going to be on the system too? The ones on the backside?
The third phase off the Sages Way are not. Those will be
Traditional IA systems, okay. So then 22 or 23 of the homes will go into this on-site sewer treatment plant. So it's basically the nitrogen coming out of there is as good or better than what's coming out of any municipal sewer treatment plant from a nitrogen standpoint, and that's really our concern. Also, if I understand from the MVC conditions, you're going to have limited lawn fertilizing or specific lawn fertilizing. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So anyway, so that's an update on Lagoon Ridge. We welcome you. I'm in the real estate business, and I like everything that you're doing there. So I'm going to move on, and maybe Jule can address it, because I do believe that when the planning board was going through this, and it was a long process, there was definitely discussion about runoff and how that would be dealt with. So, okay, Tizbery Waterway regulations over the past few years. There's been a committee in Tisbury that started with the Harbor Committee, and then it was the Waterways Advisory Committee, and now it's just the Waterways Committee. They've been trying to revamp the waterway regulations, and the part that really affects the lagoon is that there's been discussion in the past about allowing houseboats to be moored in the pond, and then the question came up about, well, what if are they going to Airbnb them? Are they going to rent them out? You know, if it becomes basically like Woods Hole Harbor, where there's 15 or 20 houseboats. So that's why we're monitoring that group, and myself and a couple of the other board members, we attend these meetings. They're on Zoom, and try to have some input when it's necessary. But they haven't made any decisions at this point. Last year, the controversial Martha's Vineyard Shipyard Marina expansion was discussed thoroughly throughout the newspapers, throughout conversations, and of course at our annual meeting last year on Zoom. It's a very, very emotional topic. Right now, this project is on hold. There's rumor or talk that it's going to come back as a revised program in the fall. No idea what it's going to be, but just so you know, we are going to monitor it. And again, the board's take is this: we're an environmental organization, and we have to look at the pond as an environment and how any development on the pond affects the pond.
So,
Yep.
so if they do reapply in the fall, so that the meetings are in the winter,
Yep.
what can we do to be helpful if we're not here physically?
Well, you can write letters. You can call the Martha's Vineyard Commission, because the next step for this is to go to the Martha's Vineyard Commission, and we will keep everybody appraised of any developments and any timeframes that come up with suggestions on action. Emma?
I just wanted to add that I believe that a lot of the meetings are very likely to remain on Zoom, at least for a little while. And so what's nice about that is that no matter where you are, you'll be able to log in. And so we could probably send around those links, so anyone.
Yeah, we'll definitely get the Zoom information out to everybody who's interested. You may remember earlier this year we had a beach cleanup planned, a specific Lagoon Pond beach cleanup. The weather was terrible, it was blowing, it was a nor'easter, and we couldn't do it. And so Sherry and Danny and Lonnie were in charge of that, and they had it set up perfect. They had the day ending with asking everybody to go down to the pond at 8:30 at night and bring a lantern, bring a flashlight, have light up the lagoon is what it was going to be called. It was going to be spectacular. So we're going to do it next year, right? All right, and then finally, from my end of things, the first week of November is going to be called Climate Change Week on Martha's Vineyard. And they're asking all organizations to come up with
Update on that, because of COVID, that November 1st week has been pushed to May. There will
To
be
May,
some
okay.
In November throughout the winter, but the climate change piece
Okay,
will be in May.
great, thanks. So we'll keep you up to date on what the Lagoon Pond Association is going to do for Climate Change Week. And so with that said, does anybody have any questions from a business standpoint? Anna?
I don't know about business, but I would like to talk about, hear about the system, the PRB system that's at the bottom of Skip Ave.
Okay, well, that's not on the agenda, Anna, so if we have time at the end of the meeting, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, so now we're going to go into the program part of the meeting, and I'm going to introduce Gail Barmakian and Anastasia Rudinko. Gail is a select board member from the town of Oak Bluffs, and she is on the committee looking at what's called a CWMP, which is a comprehensive wastewater management plan, which both Oak Bluffs and Tizbery are working on, which will help get funding for sewer projects and on-site wastewater projects that will help remove nitrogen. Anastasia is the project manager, an engineer who's helping the town of Oak Bluffs. So Anastasia, you're up, and here's Gail.
My name's Gail Barmakian. I'm a wastewater commissioner. That's my hat this morning. I want to introduce Anastasia Rudenko, who's one of the leading engineers for the comprehensive wastewater management project that is probably in the, we're in the middle of a draft right now. Just basically, I want to say that this is really, as Doug said, it's an environmental plan. It's a nitrogen management plan as it concerns managing wastewater in the town of Oak Bluffs. And I think we all need to wrap our heads around that. It's not necessarily a sewer plan, although sewering is certainly part of it. But it's how we're going to manage our wastewater in terms of complying with the Federal Clean Water Act. And for your purposes, for the lagoon specifically. I want to introduce now Anastasia Rudenko, who is going to do a presentation. I thought it was probably most appropriate at this point in time, so you get the person that's doing the work. And if there are any policy questions, feel free to ask. Afterwards, I think I just have a couple of more things to say, because it still is in a planning stage, and there are some things that I just wanted to sort of throw out so everybody's aware of of what we may expect to see by way of planning and also extension of the sewer line as well as the IA systems for the watershed.
Hey, thank you, Gail. As Gail mentioned, my name is Anastasia Budenko. I'm an environmental engineer with GHD, and I've been working with the town on the CWMP. So I'm going to start by talking about the goals of the project and a little bit of the background, and then go through the 3 phases of the project and the next steps and public participation. So I'm working on Oak Bluffs plan. Ben is working on a very similar project from Tisbury. Lagoon Pond is a shared watershed, so these 2 plans will be combined eventually into a targeted watershed management plan that will look at the pond as a whole. And we've already started collaborating. We've presented initially to Tizbery, and we'll continue to collaborate into the future as we develop these 2 plans. So the overall purpose of both projects is to effectively manage wastewater for the town and to meet the town's nitrogen Tmdls, which I'll talk about in a little bit, with the overall goal of improving the water quality and protecting public health. So this planning project is built on previous wastewater management studies, and it was initiated for nutrient impacted estuaries. The project doesn't just look at today, it looks at a 20-year planning period. So we're looking from today until about 2040 and incorporating projected growth, economic growth, and population growth. So as we come up with a solution, we're looking not only for today, but into the future. And we're looking to evaluate and recommend wastewater management solutions and to develop the most cost-effective approach for the town to meet its nutrient management goals. So a CWMP typically follows 3 phases. The first is called the needs assessment. So that's establishing what are the needs of the watershed and of the town for the 20-year planning period. And the second is to review alternatives to see what are the different options we can use to meet those 2 goals, to manage wastewater needs and to meet the nitrogen Tmdls. We narrow those down, and then we identify the most cost-effective in a recommended plan, which comes with a financial plan and an implementation schedule of when the different projects in the plan are anticipated to be implemented.
Excuse me, what
Yes.
questions now or at the end?
I can take them now. Yeah.
In the phase when you were evaluating existing conditions,
Yes.
are you taking into consideration projects that are proposed, not in place yet,
Yes.
and how they would impact as well?
So we've looked at the Martha's Vineyard Commission, the regional impact projects that are proposed, and have also been looking at proposed commercial and residential expansions and looking at population projections for the next 20 years and which watersheds it might fall into. So the needs assessment looks at existing conditions, and as we were just talking about, also into 20 years into the future. And it reviews what are the regulatory requirements that the town needs to meet through this plan, and also what are their wastewater needs. So the main regulatory driver that this project is aiming to meet is what's called a Tmdl. It's a total maximum nitrogen load. This is something that was established by the Massachusetts Estuaries project. This was a project that was sponsored by the state that looked at 89 different estuaries in southeastern Massachusetts, how much nitrogen was coming into them, and established a goal concentration that if you can meet that concentration, it's anticipated to restore the water body if it's degraded to its original condition, to a sustainable condition with healthy eelgrass, if that was part of its historical ecosystem. And then there's several benthic indicators, so several species of animals that would come back if those target concentrations are met. So the state took these Massachusetts Estuaries project and they issued Tmdls for each watershed. So Lagoon Pond has a total maximum daily load that needs to be met, along with the other 3 other coastal ponds, Sunjikataket, Farm Pond, and Tashmoo in Oak Bluff specifically, and then also in Tisbury. So these are very big projects, and the state is looking for the town to work on these plans and to make progress. So there's no timeline of when it needs to be met, but you need to show reasonable progress towards meeting the goals. These are from the Mass Estuaries project. And what these two figures are looking at are nitrogen concentrations in the pond at the time of the study. So these are different total nitrogen concentrations. And the target concentration that needs to be met is somewhere between that light and the dark blue. And the green is higher concentrations. So you can see there are several areas of the pond that are not meeting those thresholds. And what the report does is it sets what's called a sentinel station. So it picks one of the more degraded parts of the pond, and that's where you have to meet your target concentration. If you can meet it there, then you can meet it throughout the water body. And the one on the right is Sendricotachet Pond, showing a similar scenario. So very typically, where you have areas of high tidal flushing, you typically have lower nitrogen concentrations, and as you go into the upper reaches of the pond, where you have less flushing, you have more nitrogen buildup. Yes?
Excellent point. So the question that I have is, as part of your study the nitrogen loading.
Yes.
Is anyone looking at flushing of the pond as an improvement to the
Yes.
water quality?
So there were,
7 to 8
yeah.
days to flush the pond.
Yes. There were preliminary evaluations done as part of the Estuaries project, specifically for Lagoon Pond and for Farm Pond, and it looked at multiple different culvert sizes. So if you can increase the flushing through increasing the culvert, how close would that get you to your target concentration?
Great. So is there any plan to do that culvert, or that's just not part of your study?
What the study showed is that it would be very effective in Farm Pond. In Lagoon Pond, not as much. In Farm Pond. So in Farm Pond, it showed that there's an appropriate inlet widening size that will allow the pond to meet its Tmdls under current conditions. For Lagoon Pond, you don't have that same effect. So it'll continue to be.
Increased flushing doesn't decrease the nitrogen load.
No, not by itself at least. Yes?
Which color are you saying is of the problem area?
The green. So you go from blue is the best, red is the worst. So the green areas are the higher nitrogen concentrations.
I just want to say, by the nature of the geography of the pond, you can't, even if you increase the size of the culvert, which is pretty expensive anyway, and the state has to get involved, it still may not affect back here. Back here is where you've got your issues.
I'm sorry, it takes, the study's done, takes 7 to 8 days to flush the pond. If you can increase that or decrease the time to flush the pond, it will impact.
Are you talking about a particular study that was done?
I can show you studies that were done back in the 80s. Yes, they were done for the Lagoon
But
Pond.
if there are like official ones, certainly point them out and, I don't know.
Yeah.
Submit
yeah,
them
if
to
you could-
wastewater, okay?
yeah, if you
But
could
the studies were done,
Wastewater, I don't
we have
know.
more recent ones,
Yeah. So the
but that'd be interesting.
The studies that were done as part of the Estuaries project was about 2011. So that's the most recent time that modeling was done to look at what effect inlet widening would have. So this slide here shows a summary of the Massachusetts Estuaries project. What is in blue? This is the watershed. So all of the land inside this circle right here goes into Lagoon Pond. And then there's sub-watersheds for Upper Lagoon and for the basin. And then the numbers are, under current conditions, how much of the nitrogen that's currently going into the pond would need to be taken out of the pond to meet that target concentration. So where we're sitting right here near the sailing camp, for Lagoon Pond, it's approximately half of the nitrogen that's currently going into the pond that would need to be removed. And that's what we're looking to manage with this plan. And we're looking at a similar scale for all of the other watersheds in Oak Bluffs also.
And that percentage is based on when the MVP did their
Yes,
work, which
yes.
is older now by
Yeah.
5 years.
Yeah.
built in the last 5 years has contributed to that number.
Yes, and that's actually a really good point of 50% of today. That also means everything of tomorrow, if you're looking at that number as a static point.
I'm sorry, this report was done when?
This particular one was done in 2011. In our
10 years old.
Yes. In our calculations, we've worked with Martha's Vineyard Commission has a record of houses that have been built since then. And so we've added assumptions for those houses to bring it up to today. Because yes, it is becoming an older data set. Yes?
I can't read what the blue and the red mean.
So the blue is the major watershed. So this is the line, everything inside the line drains into the ponds. And then in the report, they have sub-watersheds for certain portions of the ponds. So everything in this red line drains specifically to the very upper end of Lagoon Pond, and the same thing for the basin. And some of them have, in different watersheds, they have different goals, which is why they're isolated. This is also a figure from the MEP report. And what it shows is the largest amount of nitrogen coming into the ponds is from wastewater. That's this dark blue in here. So that's why the focus of the two plans are to look at primarily controlling wastewater nitrogen going into the pond. So as I mentioned, we looked at a projected flow. So we're looking to 2040. So if you look at the amount of flow in 2040, let's focus on Lagoon Pond in specific. It's 5,800 kilograms per year. If you translate that to equivalent number of households, that's a little over 1,000 households where the nitrogen would need to be taken out of the watershed to meet those target concentrations. And then just comparing that to the number of existing houses and the total number of parcels in the watershed. And I'll be talking in a second, there's multiple different alternatives for how that nitrogen can be managed. So overall, there's a need in the town for nutrient management. There's also, Oak Bluffs has an existing wastewater treatment plant, which has a design life of 20 years, which is being approached. So there are needs at that facility. And then also within the collection system. So that's a summary of the needs that were identified as part of the CWMP. One important thing to point out is the treatment facility currently treats 244 gallons per day, and it has excess disposal capacity up to 620. When we look at our 2040 projections, we need to manage more than that, 900,000. So there really is a need for multiple solutions as part of the plan. It can't all be sewering. It has to be different nitrogen management solutions.
Why is it going up 3.5 times?
Sorry?
Why is the amount going up by just quickly looking
Yes.
at it 3.5
Yeah.
times?
So the original system was built to address small lots that couldn't fit septic systems in it. It didn't look at nutrient needs at all. Most of the increase is looking at nutrient needs today and into the future. And then there's also an allowance built in for redevelopment anywhere in the town.
Based on current zoning.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes?
I'm sorry, maybe you can explain, I'm missing it. On the previous map, you showed the nitrogen coming from both the Vineyard Haven and the Oak Bluff side, so both
Yeah.
the Oak Bluff side. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yeah.
So we're talking about the total nitrogen loading of the pond, which is fed by nitrogen from both Oak Bluffs and Vineyard Haven.
Yes.
How are we coordinating with, you're talking about the needs on the OB side, but does that take us to the right nitrogen level we want from the Lagoon? How about the Vineyard Haven side? What do they have to do? How is it included in your plan?
So that's something that Ben will be discussing. What we've done in this project is look at an estimate of what Oak Bluffs is contributing and what Oak Bluffs needs to manage.
But you're
So,
taking the Oak Bluff
yes.
side and you're bringing the nitrogen level
Yeah.
down to what you need in the Lagoon. So if we do all the work, Tizbery,
So each town is concurrently doing a similar project. So Tizbery is working on it on their end. We're working on it on Oak Bluff's end. And then we'll coordinate, because at the end of this, you'll need to do a targeted watershed management plan, which looks at the watershed as a whole, because that's a very good point. If only half is done, you don't remediate the water body. So there will be collaboration between the two towns to find a solution.
Yeah, if you read that MEP report that came out in 2011, and it's the state report, it identifies how much is coming from Oak Bluffs and how much is coming from Tisbury. So it's a useful thing to see. That way you can picture it in your mind. So Oak Bluffs contributes a certain number of gallons. And it's like Oak Bluffs is about 60% contribution and Tisbury is about 40% contribution. So we are working with Tisbury, I mean, I don't want to say, on a monthly basis it used to be. So, and we have to show the state too that we're working together. So, yeah, we're taking our own share, yeah.
I'm just trying to understand with the remediation we're talking about on the OB side.
Yep.
Does that get us, you're saying that won't get us to the
No.
right nitrogen loading for the pond?
No, but Tisbury is going to take out,
They've got to
we're
take
working
out their
together,
40%.
knowing that they're taking out what they need to take out so we can,
So then those numbers that you showed on the next slide
Yes.
is just the OB side.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I
Yes?
ask one question which is a concern of mine? This is a huge watershed that goes up in West Tisbury. Do you have any idea what the island contribution is and how maybe we can get them to help pay some of this stuff?
that's a policy question. They contribute what is it, 7% or something?
Very little, yeah.
Small percent, West Tisbury. It's a challenge. It's going to be a political challenge. We've done it informally with them, like an FYI, and we got rejection because they don't have soaring, and they would have to basically contribute money. We know that that's always an issue. Can we force them? No, we can't, but it definitely we are going to keep trying. It's a political question.
Yes?
Pond is the problem that goes.
Speak up, please.
The little pond in front of the hill where, at the top of the lagoon, where the road goes across, there's a waterway up in there, it's fresh water.
Yes.
What is the nitrogen loading?
I believe it's fairly high, but I don't know offhand. It's a freshwater system, right? Yeah.
From there up where the water would come from.
Well, it's that, if you
Yeah.
go to that, if you see the red line, that's essentially the water flow area that flows into the pond.
So is this the pond that you're? Oh, the west basin.
This red line.
Oh,
is the
okay.
contribution to that. In Tisbury, we have asked the same question about the Tashmoo and have started looking at the water coming into Tashmoo where there's the pump station there, and it does show nitrogen concentrations.
So what is the loading, there's not many houses up in that, in comparison to the other part of the Oak Bluffs all the way up. Just wondering,
Yeah. So
the geese living up in there and all that?
looking under current conditions, what the modeling shows is there isn't any nitrogen that needs to be taken out of that subbasin specifically. All right, so the next part of the project that we're currently in is looking at what are the alternatives we can use to build a cost-effective solution to this problem. We're looking at a variety of alternatives. There are a number of alternatives that can be used. For instance, it was mentioned on-site systems that are specifically designed for nitrogen removal. Shellfish polishing can be used, where the shellfish actually break down nitrogen in the water body. Permeable reactive barriers. The sail camp has been identified as a potential area for a permeable reactive barrier. And then other solutions such as Phragmites, composting toilets, and using zoning to control growth in sensitive areas. And then we're also looking at decentralized, so those are small little systems, and then centralized, which would be expanding Oak Bluff's existing system.
What are permeable reactive barriers?
So it is, you insert a media in the ground, usually either oil or wood chips, and it creates an environment that breaks down nitrogen. So it converts nitrogen to nitrogen gas. It creates an environment for those bugs to live in. And so as the groundwater moves through it, it breaks down the nitrogen. So when we look at these alternatives as a whole, we're looking at 3 different strategies. Reduction is taking out the nitrogen before it reaches the groundwater. So that's done through either sewering or IA systems where you're breaking down that nitrogen before it reaches the groundwater. Remediation is a treatment system once it's already in the groundwater, such as a PRB. And then restoration is once it's gotten into the water body, coming up with a mechanism to break it down in the water body or to flush it out. So an inlet widening or shellfish propagation. And there's a variety of different factors that we look at. On top that's an example of what a PRB looks like. And then on the bottom is where an inlet widening is being considered for farm ponds. But as part of this process, we're screening it down to a manageable amount of alternatives to produce costs to identify the most cost-effective solution. And we've developed a model that looks, for example, can the problem be solved completely with INAs? Can the problem completely be solved with different alternatives? And it helps us quantify how much of each alternative is practical within the solutions. We've been working with the town to identify up to 3 options for cost evaluation, and then those will be taken as part of the recommended plan. So the state, there's a lot of these technologies are in their pilot phase. They haven't been proven yet, and the state allows us to incorporate them into the plan. They're very promising technologies to pilot them as long as there's a backup plan with approved technologies. So our first option is looking at incorporating some of those pilot technologies. They're INA systems that produce a much lower total nitrogen concentration, which we're looking at, and then the permeable reactive barriers. And option 2 is looking at traditionally approved INAs and then taking out that permeable reactive barrier. So in Lagoon Pond specifically, we're looking at a combination of INAs or cluster systems, which would have several houses on one system, sewer extensions, and then the potential for a PRB. And in option 2, this is the completely approved, so it'd be INAs and cluster systems and sewer extensions. These are draft numbers for now, but the existing system that Oak Bluffs has a little over 700 users, and our draft plan shows INAs being used by a little over 1,000 users and bringing almost 700 people onto the system over a 20 to 30 year period. So all of this wouldn't be initiated at once, and that's part of the draft recommended plan that will be developed and will be reviewed through public presentations before it's finalized.
So how does that roughly 2,500 users compare to how many your report says you need?
So this has been designed to meet that under the future condition. So it's a little above the report, but again, we have to account for growth.
For all the water bodies?
Yes, yeah.
But the plan is satisfied?
Yes, yeah. That is the ultimate goal of the plan, is to meet those nitrogen goals and to remediate the water bodies.
Based on future build-out?
Yes, yeah. Third is the no action alternative, which is something that needs to be looked at. And so the next steps are to develop a draft recommended plan, draft financial plan, and draft implementation schedule, which will be reviewed through public presentations before being finalized and submitted to the state for their approval. And the last thing I wanted to close with is all of the documents for this project are on the Town of Oak Bluff site. I've been told we can put it on this presentation on the Lagoon Pond Association website also, but they're all publicly available, and please feel free. I know we've been answering questions as we go, but please feel free to reach out to me with any questions on the project.
We have one question here.
Yes.
So when do you anticipate the study will be completed?
We're looking potentially fall, winter of this year. To start the conversation on the recommended plan.
I'm the bearer of bad news. That most of you were here. There's going to be also a cost to this. It's going to be borne by, we don't know how, but it's going to be borne by the town or all the taxpayers of Oak Bluffs, as well as new users that will be hooked up to the system. So, I want to communicate that and share that as it comes to, as we do punch the numbers. And I think that if I can work with Doug or with Tom Zinno, who's the Board of Health, to share that so there's input from, the people that live in the watershed, many of which are part of the association, that would be helpful, as well as we're looking into growth regulations, because this is all a numbers game. So, for example, if you're hooked up to sewer, that is not going to give you permission to develop more than you would otherwise if you weren't hooked up to sewer. So all of this is going hand in hand, and I think it's relevant for our consideration on, what kind of burden we're going to impose on the whole community as well as those that are in the watershed. So I just want to say
Great.
that.
Can I just one,
Sure.
a quick question? My assumption is that we are going to be looking to state and federal funds to help us. So as we worry about West Tisbury making an impact of 7%, the voters coming from the Cape, et cetera, that there will be, it's us for sure, who's taking the burden, but we will be getting some funding someplace to accommodate the rest of the users in that. Is that correct?
Say that, when you were talking about going after some type of grant funding,
Yes.
we're aggressively identifying the particular, grant funding. Right now, there's no funding for the actual construction of the sewer plant itself, but in terms of alternatives, there has been and hopefully will be grant funding. We're working right now with the Martha's Vineyard Commission for funding for the permeable reactive barriers and the studies. Any of the other alternatives that are experiments, there's grant funding for. So we are actively and aggressively pursuing grant funding for those things.
And most of the funding requires that you have a CWMP.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
this is the first step before they can go any
It's all
further.
in the science.
I'm sorry, guys, I know you all have questions, but we're on a time frame here. If you could pass your microphone over to
Yes.
Ben.
I can project, and
Yeah.
maybe we can just
Yeah,
get
we-
into a lot of. Here, let me just.
Do you want me to close the presentation?
So anyway, this
Yeah.
is Ben Robinson. Ben is on the planning board in Tisbury, and he's on the committee in Tisbury that's working on the CWMP for the Tisbury side. And as we've discussed, we've got two towns trying to pull this all together that share this one resource. And so Ben's going to bring us up to date on what Tisbury's up to. Some of your questions that you had for Gail may be answered by Ben, or we can bring Gail back up. But just want to get the project or the program going. Thank you.
So Ben Robinson in Tisbury, we're at the beginning of a process that Oak Bluffs has started about 2.5, 3 years ago. So I'm going to go quickly through this because they covered a lot. This is just some of the people that are on the committee. I'll just point out the Select Board, Town Administrator, Water Resource. So the Water Resources Committee that is doing the CWMP has representation across the town boards, Conservation, Planning Board, Finance, Select Board, Board of Health, and the Wastewater Department. I'm going to skip this. You guys have already gotten the spiel, why we need it, and the same with the watershed. This is the Tisbury side numbers that we were just looking at the Oak Bluff side. So this is the collaboration that has to happen between the two towns. Again, you can't really see this, but it's the contribution and then what you can actually control. And I'm going to skip through the rest of this because you guys have already seen all of this. What I do want to talk about is putting this in context. I think everybody in the room realizes there's a problem with the ponds that we have to address. It's our impacts on the ponds. Gail touched on it. There's a growth consideration that we have to think about. We're looking at what is currently happening to the ponds based on the houses around the ponds today and potentially in the future based on current zoning, and that's a really important piece of it. Tisbury is, as we do this CWMP process, we're also going to be embarking on a master plan process to aim at that growth question. And then if you want to sort of broaden the context, you can really look at the Cape. The Cape is in a much worse situation than we are on the island. They've already been sued 3 times under the Clean Waters Protection Act. Barnstable County is looking at costs north of $1 billion to deal with the problem that they have. And that's our future if we sort of do that third option, the do nothing option, that we will be sued under the Clean Water Act by somebody. It can be a legal defense fund, it can be citizens, it can be anybody. And they'll sue the town and they'll sue the state, and it will cost us. So I think what we really have to think about, and Anna, I'm so glad that you brought up that condition. You know, we can look at these solutions and we don't see the big picture. We don't see the impacts beyond our own shores. And I think that's another piece of the context that we have to understand is, yes, we're looking at protecting this pond, but we have to do it in a way that protects the entire planet as well. And it's really important that we don't gloss over those issues. It's not an easy solution. This is an incredibly complex problem for us, the world, and everyone else. And so it's critical that we do not gloss over those impacts because there are impacts to everything we do. And that's where I think zoning and policy and guidance towards growth is so important. And I just put it in a bigger context is the island is teaming up with the Army Corps of Engineers, the island of Nantucket, and the state to do a carrying capacity and supply chain study for the island that should give us better data to understand what is that. And the first thing we would have to do is define what the hell is carrying capacity? What does that even mean? We're the same size as Singapore. We're 3 times the size of Manhattan. We're an island in this geography. What does that really mean? So there's a lot of conversations that have to happen to define that piece. But when we think about a CWMP, we have to think about it in context of all of these pieces so that we can remain living on a viable pond that provides the natural resources, the food, the entertainment, and all these things that we've come to enjoy. And so I'm happy to answer any questions. I know I just skipped through a bunch of things, but I just wanted to put in context what we're talking about today.
Question?
As far as increased sewer capacity and building new sewer, isn't that infrastructure, and aren't there billions of dollars now we're going to be paying for infrastructure?
No.
No, the answer is no. The answer is no, and it's been no forever for the Vineyard. We get very little money from the federal government. We get very little money from the state. The town of Nantucket is a third bigger population-wise than the whole island. We're very small. I know we think we're, something special here. The town of Falmouth has 31,000 residents, and we're around 20,000. And I don't know what their new census numbers show, but it's probably a slight increase to that 31,000.
I will tell you, when we first built the plant over 20 years ago, or just about 20 years ago, the federal government was giving money for the construction of sewer plants. They are no more doing that. Now they're going towards alternatives. Because honest to God, sewering is not the most environmentally friendly thing to do. It takes out your nitrogen, but it also causes other issues. What Old Blood specifically has done is there's some COVID relief, infrastructure relief that the county has got, and we have some improvement projects in the sewer plant, resiliency projects to the tune of maybe, $100,000 to $300,000 that we're going to apply for, and hopefully we'll get, I'd love to see $500,000 from these little pockets. But in terms of the millions of dollars, they're just not there.
There is one potential source of money tied to short-term rental tax, and it's a combination that we would be in a pool with the Cape, and the Cape and Islands are included in this legislation. So we would decide as a town to add a percentage, 2.75%, to the short-term rental tax that we could collect. That money gets pooled together, and then a board of advisors made up of mostly the Cape, but the islands, and we know how much we're putting in because that's recorded, so we should be able to draw out of that the amount of money that we'd use. There's the islands on the Cape that are already making use of those funds, and so that's something that we should really seriously consider joining as towns. But the reality is historically, we don't get a lot of money on the island, and that's really the way it is. Some of it has to do with our access to the lobbying arms that get the money. I mean, we don't have congressional offices on the Vineyard. You got to go to the Cape and you got to talk to people. But we're small, and so we should be ready to take this onto our own backs.
The other thing too is that the Cape is in far worse situation, and politically, because they were sued, the government, they need to defend themselves, and they need millions of dollars, literally, and that's why it comes. And oftentimes, my experience with the government is that unless you absolutely need it, there are others that are more in need. And so we're in a good situation relative to a lot of the Cape towns.
Yeah.
And it hurts us in that way when we're trying to compete for funding.
But on that note, for the funding question, one piece of this, and a fairly important piece of this Army Corps study, is that if we get a plan that is endorsed by the state and the federal government through the Army Corps, that will give us credibility to approach the federal government for funding. So that gives us another lever to use to try to release some of the funds that are at the federal government, but they're really not there now.
Can you give us just a quick status update on the Tizbery water treatment plant?
Tisbury's water treatment plant is about a third smaller than Oak Bluff's. There's 125 current users. Not one of those users is in a watershed, either Tajmu or the Lagoon. So our water treatment plant is doing nothing for the nitrogen loading in our ponds currently. And there's probably a few thousand gallons of flow remaining to be used. And once you cross the threshold that we've already crossed, you need to now start expanding your plant. So that we do have some plans to upgrade aspects of the plant so that we can increase flow and get around another 35,000 gallons of flow. But we're going to have to consider increasing our plant the way Oak Bluffs does, and we're going to have to consider alternative methods, and then we're really going to have to consider build out. How much more development are we going to absorb and be able to control through mechanisms that we'll have to build? And that's where Anna's point becomes really critical, is that we measure that not just on the impact of us on the Vineyard, but everybody.
So, in essence, the water treatment plant is not our solution.
The water treatment plant is a portion of the solution, but we have to really look at the whole picture. And it's the most expensive part of our solution.
And is the business district, behind Trip Barnes, that area, are they all on it, or
The
there seems
B2
to be a lot of growth in it?
Yep, the B2 district is not on the sewer system yet. It is in the Lake Tajmu watershed. The town has identified that as an area that requires sewering or does require some sort of nitrogen removal. It's also a part of Tizbery that has the potential to absorb some new growth. And so you have to combine these two efforts. One begets the other.
Any other questions? Back?
Yeah, I just to note, it seems we're the only species that feels the need to relieve ourselves in water. Would it be possible to mandate composting toilets? Maybe start with a new development. Clitus Ultram makes these composting toilets. That would solve so much of this problem. There was one little mention of it in the presentation.
Right, composting toilets are a great option, and there's a bit of a...
Is it possible to mandate it to,
Yes.
start with a new development and then maybe give everybody else 20 years to catch up?
What you would mandate is that your development can only produce X amount of nitrogen, and you have to show how you would remove it. The West Tisbury Library, anybody that doesn't know what a composting toilet is, go to the West Tisbury Library, try their restroom. That's a composting toilet. There are composting toilets out in the world. Yeah.
A lot of people don't like them. I think they did a study in Falmouth where everybody signed on, and once they installed them, they wanted done with them. So, as Ben said, we don't want to tell you how to do it.
Right.
You make your own choice, but
And it's it's true, it's hard enough to get our fellow citizens to even wear masks for the period of
Yeah, exactly.
Those my 2 cents.
I'd like to-
Anna? Sure.
I'd like to point out that almost all the nitrogen in human waste is in the urine. And in compost toilets, what do? It has to be released. It does not stay in the compost toilet. And the current solution is that they get pumped out and taken to the septic treatment facility. And every time that they have said no more because they're full, it gets shipped off island. It's a tremendous cost. And some people just kind of put their clothes in and pump into the collection chamber for the urine, and then they just put a hose to it and just let it run. And of course, then it causes just as much pollution as if it was a regular type of fire system. So compost toilets are, there's going to be a maximum 10% of people that will be doing it over there. It's going to be very expensive too. $250,000 for the compost toilet in the West Tisbury Library. $250,000.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm Nancy Gilfoy, I'm on the Tizbery Waste CWMP committee, and there's a sign-up sheet on the table out there if you'd like to be on our mailing list. There's going to be a whole bunch of public meetings over the course of the next 2 or 3 years regarding the Tizbery CWMP, so if you're on the mailing list, we'll make sure to let you know when they happen.
So this is, yeah, thank you, everybody. So this is a whole lot of new information for most of us out here. I believe each town's website has a reference to this. Does the town have something on?
Yeah, and that you can see it.
Oh, yeah, you can see it down here, and Oak Bluffs as well. So that's where you want to go if you want to learn more about the CWMP and the process that's going on. So now I want to introduce Jule Hopkins, who is the chairman of the planning board in Oak Bluffs. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about what the planning board is up to in the watershed.
Thanks, Doug.
You get that too.
I got it. And I appreciate the opportunity. I was actually here last year. I live in Tower Ridge,
Actually,
right
2
around
years ago.
2 years ago. I live in Tower Ridge. I'm actually the first house that's in the Senji, not the Lagoon watershed. My neighbor is in this watershed. The line is very interesting. I want to talk about a few things because public engagement is so critical for everything we're discussing. So I want you to understand the long-term vision. We have folks that are running the town, and we have folks that are visioning where we're going. First of all, I planned on talking a lot about Lagoon Ridge subdivision today. But I had the opportunity to meet with the owners and ask them to attend this meeting. So I'm actually glad they're here. So I encourage you to talk to them directly after the meeting and if you have any questions during my piece. What I do want to say about that project is that the planning board in Oak Bluffs worked on that for a total of almost 8 years and numerous hearings and reviews and starts and stops. I am very excited as much as I can be for development for this project, and each one of those words is key. I heard the discussion earlier about access on Double Ox Way. We have put tremendous insight into the geometry of that entrance in terms of vehicular safety and access to the number of houses that are there, but there was no engineering or designing for runoff in our conditions of that plan. So we're going to actually have to look at if the re-geometry of that entrance is going to improve that situation, but I wanted to speak to that directly. In addition, there are like 4 key points to that project that I think are relevant for all of you that I think you should consider. We're currently, and the owners are working with our water department in terms of water infrastructure. There is tremendous opportunity to address water capacity, water quality, and flow. We have a lot of dead ends to our water system now, which compromises and creates a sediment and compromises water quality. I am really hoping that we'll take advantage as a town of the opportunity when there are no houses, there's no infrastructure in place, to create some connections and have some continuous flows in terms of improving water quality and water pressure in this area. We were talking a little bit about this yesterday. It might not be inherently in the outcome or the capacity of the Lagoon Ridge subdivision, so the town may have to step up. And I plan on writing some letters next week about that. In addition, this is not a gated community in concept or in design. The trail system that is currently enjoyed by many of us from Pondview, Tower Ridge, Meadowview Farms, Bays Hill, and others will not be eliminated. Public access will be maintained. It actually will be improved in a few areas. And walking the site just yesterday, we were literally looking at step by step, what's the impact, how do people access. As an example, one of the hammerheads or the ends of the roads they're designing will have parking for a limited number of cars to be able to access the trails where prior you didn't have that. I talked about lines of sight and I talked about improvement. So I encourage everyone, spend time on the town website. We have numerous documents on this subdivision that you can read. And if you have any questions, please call the owners or call me at the planning board to understand the expectations that the town has for this project as we move forward. We're not washing our hands of it. We're going to stay very involved, be very collaborative. The fact that the owner is here today demonstrates to me that they want to be good neighbors and they want to be a part of our community.
There was a question earlier about the runoff.
Yeah, I mentioned that was not a condition in the decision. The geometry of the entrance is going to be modified fairly significantly, and I think it will improve runoff, but that wasn't an inherent goal of that design. Okay. Four points that I want, and then I'll stop and say if you have any questions. First of all, the most important thing to me is to be accessible to all of you, for you to know who is your planning board member and how you contact and how you reach us. So our website is very accessible, and I encourage you to spend time on it. The things that we're working on that I think are pertinent to this group is right now, infill development is a major concern in Oak Bluffs. We have little pockets of open space that seemingly don't get the attention of the land bank and other larger conservation industries in our island. But as they are filled in, the impact is tremendous. So we're constantly looking at what will be the impact of infill development throughout Oak Bluffs. Additionally, we're starting up a zoning reform subcommittee in October to look at the limitations of zoning. Zoning, in my opinion, is supposed to make a clear statement to potential developers and investors in a community to what the town is encouraging and wants to see, so that you can look at as of right functionality and also where we're putting very strict guidance and concerns on. So if you're considering investing in a municipality, what can you expect from the town? Zoning is supposed to tell you that story. Right now, our zoning doesn't tell you what our priorities are as a community, in my opinion. It's actually in conflict in many instances. Additionally, I talked a little bit about the water capacity in Oak Bluffs, drinking water, and the benefits that Lagoon Ridge may bring to that conversation. We are working very closely with the water department to understand their needs for growth, which they've been very clear about, and the impact it has on land use and the impact it has on zoning. So we can't address one without understanding the implication of the others. So I encourage you all to be involved in that conversation. And then finally, we haven't coined the area of town, but consider the cap landfill, the transfer station, wastewater facility. I'm looking for a catchy name. I'll come up with one. But there's a lot happening in that corner. We've just put up recently a major communication tower to improve emergency access and communication across the island. You might notice that tower is new. The transfer station we just had a new RFP that went out. We're talking about what actually is going to happen and not happen in the transfer system that Bruno's is managing long term. There was a proposal that has been tabled for now for a park and ride on the corner of Pennsylvania and County Road that turned out to be a lot more controversial than I anticipated. But there are plans in place to look at that. Bellevue Ave on the other side by Tower Ridge, where I live, between Tower Ridge and the Cap landfill, Bellevue Ave, there are drawings and plans in place for affordable housing, which are stalled at this point, but I think it's very important for everyone to understand that. I talked about the wastewater department and wastewater expansion. You heard that discussing. And then let us not forget that we have those phenomenal baseball fields in the back. So we have this whole area of town that is quickly being considered and planned for as we talk about what I call the southern tier, which is closer to Edgartown, Vineyard Haven Road. So there's a lot of forward thinking going on in Oak Bluffs. Some permitted, some not permitted, but I don't want people to ever raise their hand and say, oh my gosh, we didn't see that coming. There's a lot being considered, and if any of this has triggered any thoughts or questions, that's my intent. Please reach out, and the planning board would love to talk to you. Thanks. Any questions? Richard Toole? I love controversies. Yeah. Yeah, we are not, there is no formal effort at the town level to address that junkyard and the long-term plans for that junkyard. There are also no formal or long-term plans in place to address the impact of Gooddale's gravel operation, because ultimately they will deplete the land that's available, and there has to be a plan. So those are two significant industries in Oak Bluffs that if anyone tells you there's a plan in place, there's no plan in place. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I think that bicycling on Barnes Road is very hazardous, and I don't know why it is. We can't require people to use county road. Yes, it's longer, but whenever I bike to the airport or anything, I go to county road and back because it's safe.
Yeah, it's a very good, first of all, mandating or requiring or encouraging is a different edge of the spectrum. So encouraging and supporting, I think you're absolutely spot on. When I think about the infrastructure for bicycle traffic if I were at the high school and I needed to get to the fire station, I would never consider Barnes Road because it's not my second choice, it's my third choice. My first choice would be through the woods, through the trail system that we just talked about with Lagoon Ridge, right up to the water tower by Pennsylvania Ave and then down the street. That's the ideal bike route. If you need hot top and you can't do the gravel approach, then I would get you over to the shared use path on County Road. But to mandate or to say that you cannot or prohibit bicycles on Barnes, that's not going to come. We just need to educate the public as much as we can.
There could be signs on Barnes Road. Yes.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Education, yes.
Yeah, dangerous for bikes.
Yes.
Because it's tourists, it's people who don't know that.
And we have a committee called Roads and Byways that has the authority to that has the mission to look at situations like that and bring recommendations to the select board. So I would encourage that to be on the agenda of Roads and Byways in Oak Bluffs. And I'll make a note of that. Please, gentleman in the red.
When you're coming up at the rotary, the sign says Oak Bluffs, and it's right in front of you in the bicycle path. It should say bicycle path to Oak Bluffs going down Edgartown Road. Just a simple sign like that, because big groups come and they say, oh, there's the arrow that says Oak Bluffs, we're going to Oak Bluffs, and they just start down, and they've got 30 bicycles in a row.
I made a note of that as well. I hate throwing out and saying committees, but it's amazing how we have distributed the responsibility in town. There is a committee that will look specifically at that and make recommendations. There's a member on the planning board who's responsible for the sign committee, and I will make sure that that's addressed as well, or looked at. I don't have the authority to make the decision. Yes, ma'am.
I remember a few years ago that there was a planning committee that made alternative bike paths suggestions throughout the island, and I have a copy of that now. I think that we could do a better job of getting that map into the hands of all these bicycle groups that come to the island. They're using Barnes Road and other unsafe paths to get to where they're going.
Yeah, I think it's important that this question gets bubbled up to people's attention. We're working on other challenging areas of town for bicycle access, primarily coming from the drawbridge, getting into town. And this is definitely an area that needs to be considered. It's controversial all over the island. We as bike enthusiasts tried to get a shared use path on North Road, or Middle Road, and both were like completely shut down there in terms of getting up island. So it's an ongoing issue that we have to work on, and I'll make sure that access on Barnes Road is brought back higher into the level of conversation. Were there any follow-up questions? I think that's it.
How about bicycles on Circuit Avenue? There used to be a
So, hey guys, I gotta interrupt this. We're not here to discuss bicycles across the island. Sorry about that. Any Lagoon Pond questions for Yule? Great. Thank you, Yule.
Thank you.
All right, we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to invite up Danielle Ewart and Chuck Fisher, the shellfish constables for Tizbery and Oak Bluffs. They're just going to take some questions. If anybody has any questions on shellfish and what's going on in the pond. Danny, I'm going to let you hold this, and you can pass it to Chuck.
I'll just sit back down. Okay.
Okay.
Hi. How's it going? So any questions? Yes.
I have a question. So, I see a lot of shells just in the water, open, just, not alive, apparently. Is that just normal, or are they done?
Sometimes we'll have, just see a lot of the shells congregate to the surface. I mean, it might have been like a die-off event, but I haven't seen one recently in the lagoon. I mean, I know there are shells that, are they quahogs or are they soft shells?
Yeah, they're quahogs and,
Okay.
mostly quahogs.
I'll have to,
And they're just open, they're like, so I was like, oh, did somebody bring their boat in and just throw shells off, or is this a concern?
also some of them do die, and then you will see some piles of them in certain areas. I mean, I guess I'd have to go out there and take a look, but I mean, I know if there are crowded areas, we'll see a lot of shellfish come to the surface. I know, if you guys like to go shellfishing in Vineyard Haven, over by the bridge, it's easy to access and shellfish in there.
It is a
But
combination of lots of things, kind of like
Here.
Danny was saying, it's a combination of lots of things. It could be kind of depending upon the location. People do dump their shells when they're done fishing. Sometimes there is a natural death that just is happening in the area. Predators can affect them, especially areas that are heavily seeded. Like Danny was saying, it'll drive some of them to the surface, and then there'll be a predation event in that area, and it'll cause just shells all over the place, really. So it can be a combination of lots of different things.
I just also wanted to say I have not seen very many spider crabs, so bravo.
Oh, okay, good.
I think it's working.
Good.
I got 3 questions, but they had watch the sequel. They're always taking those claims for 3 Three things. One, how did we do on planting shellfish this year? I noticed on Hines Point, not Hines Point, Chuck, you know, right?
Sandy Point?
Sandy Point.
Yep.
How much stuff did we put in there? I noticed there were less nets I saw this year than in the past. I don't know if that, let me give you a question. Can you answer the same way you want? What do you think of actually planting eelgrass? I'm disappointed in the water quality the last couple of years. Actually, since they rebuilt the bridge, it seems to have degraded rapidly over the last 2 or 3 years. So what are the odds that eelgrass, when we were loaded with eelgrass 15 years ago, 10 years ago, loaded, to the point that I hate going swimming in there because I keep got that. But what's the possibility that stuff actually growing at this point? Maybe it's not that far down the pond. And I guess the third one is, we're not doing oysters or anything in the lagoon, but I thought there was an oyster hatching, oyster farm over by the hatchery. Is that correct? Or am I missing?
Yes, there is. That's a new, thanks Chuck. That's a new aquaculture farm over there, and it was granted to Jeff Canna. I don't know if you guys know who he is. Can you hear me? Is this thing even on?
That's just going.
Oh, okay. So anyway, sorry. Yeah, so that's granted to Jeff Canna, and there's going to be another one also a little bit further down in front of Cronegg Ave, down by Park. But eelgrass. So yes, I have noticed a decline in eelgrass in the lagoon, especially after the bridge was built. And we are doing some experimenting with planting eelgrass with Emma Green Beach and the Martha's Vineyard Shellfish Group. We had a raft that we overwintered in the lagoon, and we also are going to try some other experimental things with eelgrass. I don't know if Emma wants to touch on that.
I would love to chime in a little bit. Yeah, so the Shellfish Group in partnership with, Danielle and also Shopping Future, we're working on trying to propagate the eelgrass and the hatchery and plant it back out. And we're trying different areas, and we're going to keep trying. But the truth is that the visibility is low because, it's so clouded with the phytoplankton, so where it's deep, the sun doesn't hit the bottom, and when it's shallow, it's too hot. And so those are the challenges. Those really come back to water quality and nitrogen loading and all the other things that we've been talking about. So we're going to keep trying so that when we're hopeful that water quality will improve, and when it does improve, we will have methods down that will really help us. Does that answer it? We'd love to show you sometime at the Shellfish Group, like some of the methods that we're using to get a little farther along.
Also about, I think you had another question about gear that we have out there. Well, you had a question about gear, right? Out in front of Sandy Point?
I could ask you about that.
How many cohogs and what did you throw out the pond this year? Versus last year?
Oh my goodness.
For both sides.
Well, we're still growing the cohogs that will go into the lagoon for this year. Last year, we had a pretty good spawn through the Shellfish Group, and for Oak Bluffs, we split them between Sunjacantachet, the lagoon, and some go into the harbor as well. But we usually put close to 750,000 to 2 million cohogs in the lagoon annually. And those seeding locations vary a lot. Some depends on historical harvest spots. Some is just how we see they're taking and growing in those areas. Others are water quality concerns, and the shellfish do help with the water quality, so we try and put some in certain areas that we think that might increase those areas. But also, they have to be harvested too. So putting them in places that aren't going to come out is a difficult location. And as far as the gear we have out there, we used to have all of our scallop gear off of Sandy Point. And since then, I've been moving it around, just seeing better locations for it, just where there's increased growth rates, just to help with their survival rates too. So it moves around a lot. No, not at all. And a lot of seeding does happen in that area too.
It's taking longer for me to get my limit, that's all.
Yeah.
I don't want to move.
Well, I'll keep that under consideration and see where
You
it
can
goes
always
this
come
year.
to Vineyard Haven. I'm just joking.
Do you have a question, miss?
Question, just an interesting dichotomy. We talk about the expansion of the marina over by the museum, and you say shellfishing helps with the water.
Right.
Very interesting.
Yeah, no, it's always a struggle, you know, it's either you want to have boats or you want to have shellfish. This year we have seen FDA regulations go into place, so we have areas that are now a lesser water quality, like conditionally improved instead of approved. That's the beauty about the vineyard. We have, you know, as opposed to the Cape where it's like, it's iffy, it's like, you know, you have some that are, you know, there's always some kind of a closure some time of the year. But on the island, it's mostly approved conditions, but now with the new there's a new FDA regulation, and I'm sure that you've seen or heard about closures like in Tashmoo where there's more than 20 boats. So you'll see along pretty much the eastern side of Tashmoo closed, and you'll see there's downgraded areas. So around the mooring field over by the Lagoon Landing is also downgraded from approved to conditionally approved. However, because of the type of boat and the usage of the boat, it's open, it's in the open status. But further down over, just at the base of Hines Point, where there's that other mooring field, between the two docks there, that area is closed because of the amount of boats there. So it's not like a wonderful, like easy cut and dry thing. It's based off of, you know, research and documentation of what's going on. So I mean, like, there's always going to be that issue. So yes, if there is another marina in the lagoon, it is going to shut down areas to shellfishing.
And
So
not to stir the pot or take sides about the marina, but the West Arm, for one, it is impaired, and like you said, shellfish do help with water quality. But also, the West Arm is a great spot because the bottom is really good for shellfish. It's very accessible because it's shallow and there's some parking right there, and lots of people can get down there very easily.
Yeah.
So to cut that area off, it's difficult for a few reasons.
Go ahead and take that from me. No more questions for the shellfish constables? You guys free to go? Thank you. So we're only a couple of minutes past 11. I think we did great. We got a lot of information in today. Again, I thank you all for showing up and bringing your environmental conscious minds to this great meeting. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thank you.